What kind of person demands thousands of dollars from someone who never signed up for their game? That's the question that burned in my mind when I opened the crisp, official-looking envelope from the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association. My name, Elena Martinez, was typed neatly on the front. But the contents hit like a freight train, a bill for $3.200 in backdated HOA fees for a neighborhood I'd never agreed to join. I'd moved into my small, ivy-covered rental cottage on the edge of Pinewood 6 months ago, drawn by its quiet streets and the promise of solitude. I wasn't a homeowner, just a tenant. And I'd made it clear to my landlord that I wanted no part of the HOA's manicured lawn dictatorship. Yet here I was, staring at a demand for money I didn't know, signed by someone named Karen, as the neighbors whispered, a woman whose reputation for ruling Pinewood with an iron fist preceded her. I crumpled the letter in my fist, my pulse racing. The audacity of it felt personal, like a slap I hadn't seen coming. I'd heard the stories Karen strutting through the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, barking orders about mailbox colors and hedge heights. She was a one-woman tribunal, her sharp tongue an unyielding glare enough to make grown men scurry. But I wasn't one of her cowed subjects. I'd spent years as a federal investigator, navigating high-stakes cases with far scarier players than a suburban tyrant. If Karen thought she could bully me into submission, she was about to learn who she was dealing with. The next morning, I marched to the HOA's monthly meeting, the letter tucked in my back pocket like a loaded gun. The community center was a bland box of a building, its walls plastered with posters about community pride and standards. Inside, a dozen residents sat in folding chairs, their faces a mix of boredom and dread. At the front, Karen presided over the room like a queen on a thrift store throne. She was larger than life, her bright red blazer straining slightly, her hair teased into a helmet of curls, her eyes scanning the crowd for dissent. 2 board members flanked her, a nervous-looking man named Ted who kept adjusting his glasses, and a woman, Linda, who clutched a stack of agendas like a shield. Karen's voice boomed as she lectured about fines for unapproved garden gnomes. I didn't wait for an invitation. I stood, my chair scraping loudly against the linoleum, and held up the crumpled bill. Excuse me, Ms. Gwen, I said, my voice steady but sharp. Care to explain why I'm being charged for an HOA I never joined? The room went silent, every eye swiveling to Karen. Her lips twitched, but her gaze hardened, locking onto me like a missile. You live in Pinewood, Ms. Martinez, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. That makes you subject to our rules. Membership is mandatory. I laughed a short, incredulous sound that made Ted flinch. Mandatory. I'm a renter, not a homeowner. My landlord never signed your contract, and neither did I. This bill is extortion. Karen's face reddened, her fingers tightening around her gavel. The covenants apply to all residents. She snapped. You benefit from our services: landscaping, security, community events. You pay your share. I stepped closer, my heart pounding but my voice calm. I never asked for your services. And I know the law. You can't enforce a contract I didn't sign. The room buzzed with whispers. Karen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. You think you're above the rules. We'll see about that. Pay the bill, or we'll lien your property. The threat hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. I felt a spark of anger, but kept my face neutral. You're welcome to try, I said, but you might want to check my credentials first. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing the cool plastic of my federal ID. I didn't pull it out, not yet. Let her dig her own grave. Karen wasn't backing down. She doubled down, her voice rising. This is Pinewood, not some free-for-all. You don't get to waltz in and disrespect our community. She turned to the board members, her tone commanding. Ted, draft a lien notice. Linda, schedule a compliance inspection for MS. Martinez's property tomorrow. Ted fumbled with his pen, clearly rattled, while Linda nodded hesitantly. The other residents shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding my gaze, others watching with wide-eyed curiosity. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. A soft voice piped up from the back of the room. She's not the only one. I turned to see Mrs. Ellison, a frail woman in her 70s who lived 2 streets over. Her hands trembled as she stood, clutching a similar bill. I got one too, she said, her voice cracking. I've lived here 20 years, paid every fee on time. But now Karen's saying I owe back payments for a special assessment I never voted on. The room erupted in murmurs. Another man, a young father named Javier, stood. Same here. $2,000. Out of nowhere. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just about me. Karen was running a racket, preying on anyone she thought wouldn't fight back. I looked at Mrs. Ellison, her eyes glistening with fear, and felt a surge of protectiveness. I'd dealt with predators before, corrupt officials, shady contractors, but this was personal. These were my neighbors, people who just wanted to live in peace. Karen's smug expression faltered for a split second, but she recovered quickly, banging her gavel. This meeting is for members in good standing, she barked. If you have issues, submit them in writing. I wasn't letting her off that easily. No, I said, stepping into the aisle. We're addressing this now. You're targeting people who can't or won't push back. That stops today. Karen's face contorted, her voice rising to a near shriek. You're out of order. Sit down, or I'll have you removed. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Removed. By who? Your clipboard. The room gasped, a few people stifling laughs. Karen slammed her gavel again, but I could see it in her eyes she was losing control. I pulled out my federal ID and held it up, the seal glinting under the fluorescent lights. Elena Martinez, Federal Trade Commission, Fraud Division, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. I investigate scams. And this, I waved the bill, looks an awful lot like one. The room froze. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, her face paling. Ted dropped his pen, and Linda's agenda slid off her lap onto the floor. The residents stared, some whispering, others leaning forward in their seats. Karen tried to rally. This is ridiculous, she sputtered. You can't intimidate us with a badge. But her voice shook, and I saw the first crack in her armor. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. I've taken down bigger fish than you. Karen, keep pushing, and I'll make sure every one of your bills gets audited by my office. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, she looked small, her bravado crumbling like cheap plaster. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Karen's hands trembled as she gripped the table, her red blazer suddenly seeming too big for her frame. I didn't let up. You've been sending these bills to people who never agreed to your terms, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You're banking on them being too scared or too tired to fight back. Mrs. Ellison's on a fixed income. Javier's got 2 kids to feed. You think you can bleed them dry because you've got a gavel and a title? Karen's eyes darted to the crowd, searching for allies. But the mood had shifted. The residents weren't just watching now, they were angry. Mrs. Ellison dabbed at her eyes, her frail frame straighter than before. Javier crossed his arms, his jaw tight. Even Ted and Linda looked uneasy, their loyalty to Karen visibly wavering. I pressed on. I checked the county records before I came here. Pinewood's HOA bylaws don't allow retroactive fees for non-members. You're breaking your own rules, Karen. And I'm guessing this isn't the first time. She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. I've already contacted my office. They're pulling your financials as we speak. Every bill, every special assessment, every penny you've collected. If there's 1 cent out of place, I'll know. Karen's face drained of color, her lips pressed into a thin line. The room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. Then came the collapse. Karen sank into her chair, her hands falling limp at her sides. This is a misunderstanding, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. She looked at Ted and Linda, as if expecting them to leap to her defense. But Ted was staring at his shoes, and Linda was gathering her papers, her face flushed with embarrassment. The residents began to speak, their voices rising in a chorus of outrage. You fined me for my son's basketball hoop, one woman shouted. You charged me for a fence I never built, called another. Karen's empire was crumbling, and she knew it. I didn't need to say another word. The truth was out, and the people she'd intimidated for years were finding their voices. Mrs. Ellison stood again, her hands steady now. I trusted you, she said, her voice soft but piercing. I thought you were protecting our community, but you were just taking from us. The words hit harder than any gavel, and Karen flinched as if struck. I stepped back, letting the residents take over. They deserved this moment. Javier organized a vote to suspend all pending fines and liens until an independent audit could be conducted. Ted, finally finding his spine, seconded the motion. Linda hesitated, then nodded, her eyes avoiding Karen's. The motion passed unanimously, and Karen didn't even try to object. She sat there, silent, her hands folded in her lap, her reign over Pinewood effectively over. As the meeting adjourned, people crowded around me, their gratitude spilling out in handshakes and tearful thanks. Mrs. Ellison hugged me, her thin arms surprisingly strong. I didn't think anyone would stand up to her. She whispered. I smiled, tucking my ID back into my pocket. Someone always has to, I said. Walking back to my cottage that evening, the air felt lighter, the neighborhood quieter. The ivy on my porch swayed gently in the breeze. And for the first time since moving here, I felt like I belonged. Karen's bills were just paper now, destined for a shredder. But more than that, the people of Pinewood had remembered what it felt like to stand up, to fight for what was right. I thought about the cases I'd worked on over the years: corporate fraud, Ponzi schemes, con artists who thought they were untouchable. Karen was small-time in comparison, but the damage she'd done was real. She'd preyed on trust, weaponized rules to control and profit. But she'd underestimated the power of truth, of community, of one person willing to say enough. The next week, I helped Javier and Mrs. Ellison file formal complaints with the state's HOA oversight board. Karen resigned quietly, her red blazer nowhere in sight when she handed over her gavel. The audit uncovered years of mismanaged funds and unauthorized fees, enough to keep investigators busy for months. Pinewood began to heal, its residents meeting not just to argue over lawn ornaments, but to rebuild a sense of trust. Sometimes, all it takes is one spark to ignite change. For Pinewood, that spark was a crumpled bill and a federal ID flashed at the right moment. For me, it was a reminder that no matter how small the battlefield, standing up for what's right is never a small thing.